He wasn't supposed to survive. Not out here. Not after that. A battered German shepherd limped across the scorched sands of southern Arizona, his body a patchwork of old scars and fresh wounds, paws split open from days of heat and grit. The desert didn't offer second chances, but somehow this dog had one thing no one expected: a memory. Not of a place, not of a name, of a scent, of a man. And that was enough to turn him around, to drag himself back toward a death he didn't have to witness, but somehow knew he couldn't let happen. Because once someone had saved him, now it was his turn. 15 miles outside the forgotten town of Sable Rock, there were no roads, just dust. Rust-colored, bone-dry, and whipped into the air with every gust of desert wind. There were no cell towers, no billboards, no tourists taking selfies with cactus. Just an abandoned fence line stretching across a plain where even rattlesnakes avoided the sun. And there, tied to 2 weather-warped posts, were 2 men. Marines. Sergeant Boone Keller, late 30s, sunburned skin pulled tight across a square jaw, his dog tags gone, and his arms bound so tight the ropes cut into muscle. His lips were blistered, his boots full of sand. The kind of man built to carry others, now barely upright, barely breathing. Beside him, Corporal Milo Drennan, younger, wiry, and fading fast. Blood caked at the corner of his mouth from where he'd bit through his cheek. His head sagged forward, one eye swollen shut, his chest rising only every few seconds like his body was picking its battles now. They had been left here, not by accident, but by order. Someone wanted them forgotten. And up on the ridge, nose twitching in the hot breeze, Bruno watched. 5 years old, once a proud member of a Marine K-9 unit. Now discarded, unwanted, labeled aggressive, unfit, and a risk to handlers. But Bruno wasn't confused. He remembered Boone, not by face, not by voice, by the smell of pine soap, gun oil, and blood. Years ago, Boone had pulled him out of a burning vehicle while bullets snapped overhead. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't flinched. He'd just scooped Bruno up like he mattered. And that scent, buried deep in Bruno's memory, was rising from the man now hanging from a fence in the middle of nowhere. Bruno shifted his weight, testing his back paw. Torn again, didn't matter. He started down the ridge. The sand here burned even after dark. But as the sun dipped below the buttes and mesas and the world turned purple with bruised light, the cold set in fast. Not a gentle chill, the kind that bites. Bruno moved without sound. His pads made no print on the dust. He crept toward the men. Boone twitched. Milo groaned. No words. The dog pressed himself against Boone's leg, sharing what little warmth he had. He licked moisture from the nearby stones and brought it back, drop by drop, onto cracked lips. He didn't know why. He didn't need to. The desert didn't judge motives, only action. Most dogs would have walked away. He almost did. He had every reason not to trust men. The last one had kept him locked in a truck bed for days before dumping him outside town limits like old junk. But Boone Keller had once whispered something different, not a command, but a promise. You're okay. And somehow, Bruno believed it still. So he stayed through the night, as coyotes yipped in the distance, as dust blew across the dead grass, as the stars wheeled overhead like silent watchers. And when dawn broke, Bruno didn't curl up and sleep. He ran. Miles. Over shale. Through dry washes. Across cactus flats where his paws bled again. Because somewhere out there, someone might still listen. At Cactus Hollow Ranch, about 30 miles south, Silas Grady stirred his black coffee on the porch. Former Marine, mid-50s. Lean, sun-creased, and mostly silent since he'd come back from a tour that ended in blood and regrets. He wasn't expecting a visitor, certainly not one with 4 legs, a notched ear, and eyes like dark soil. Bruno barked once, then again, then turned and ran down the road, stopped, looked back, barked again. Silas set down his mug. "Either I'm losing my mind," he muttered, grabbing his hat, "or that dog's trying to tell me something." Quick pause. If this moment's got your heart pounding, or if you've ever believed animals know more than we give them credit for, now's the time. Hit that subscribe button on our channel, Heroes for Animals. We share true stories and tales like this one, where 4 legs and loyalty save the day. Don't miss what happens next. Bruno didn't wait for a saddle, but Silas saddled up anyway. A paint gelding named Murphy, half lazy and half miracle, and packed water, bandages, rope, and a sidearm. The dog led. The man followed, old ghosts rising with every hoofbeat. For over an hour they rode through dry creek beds, ravines, and heat that clung like wet denim. Silas said nothing. Bruno didn't slow, until they crested a final rise and saw it. 2 figures, slumped, tied to posts, barely moving, skins blistered, lips cracked. No backup, no gear, just rope burns and silence. Silas froze, his jaw clenched. "Jesus," he whispered. He kicked the horse forward and dismounted hard. Bruno sprinted down, barking, pawing at Boone's leg. Silas pulled out his blade, started cutting ropes like a man possessed. "You ain't dying today," he muttered through his teeth. "Not out here." The wind howled. Boone collapsed into Silas's arms, eyes barely open. "You," he rasped. "You found me." "Not me," Silas said, nodding at the dog. "Him." Boone's gaze shifted to Bruno, who sat stiff and still, one ear twitching. "No way," Boone muttered. "You're dead." Bruno stepped forward and pressed his head to Boone's chest. Silas wiped grit from his face and said quietly, "Guess some dogs don't quit." Boone Keller didn't know if he was dreaming or dying. The sun had boiled the thoughts clean out of his head, but he could feel the rough fur pressed against his ribs, smell the dust and blood, and hear the low growl of something not ready to let go. His eyes cracked open to slits. Bruno, not a ghost, not a hallucination. The dog from years ago. The one he'd pulled from wreckage during a mission they were never supposed to talk about. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, but he managed a rasp. "You're real." Bruno didn't move, just stared, steady and silent, the way only an old canine could, like he'd been watching this whole time, waiting for someone to come back to life. Silas Grady worked fast. He freed Milo next, gently easing the younger man down into the strip of shade cast by the ridge. Milo groaned, his body folding like a worn-out tent, sand crusted in the cracks of his lips, his eyes fluttering in half-conscious protest. "Stay with me," Silas muttered, cracking the seal on his canteen and letting a trickle of water fall into Milo's mouth. "You're not done yet." The desert was quiet, except for the wind rattling through dry brush and the soft shuffle of Bruno's paws as he paced between the 2 men, tail stiff, ears alert. Silas paused to wipe his brow. He glanced toward the horizon. Still no sign of another soul. His gut twisted with the memory that hadn't gone quiet in a decade. 15 minutes late. 1 man dead. It was a mistake you carry into your bones. But not this time. Not again. A soft crackle broke the silence. Boone's voice, hoarse, but sharper than before. "He found you?" Silas nodded once. "Ran all the way, bleeding like hell. Barked till I listened." Boone coughed, grimacing. He was always the stubborn one. Bruno sat nearby, panting quietly, his eyes flicking from one man to the other, tail swishing slow across the sand like a metronome for something heavy but alive. Later, after they'd gotten small sips of water into both men and cooled their skin with damp bandanas, Boone spoke again, not loud, just clear enough for Silas to hear. "There's a book." Silas raised an eyebrow. "In my boot," Boone said. "Left side, phone in." Silas found it, a weather-beaten field notebook, maybe 3 inches tall, wrapped in stained cloth, the kind Marines use to keep near their dog tags. He opened it. Page after page of tight block lettering. Dates, times, drop points, initials, and names. Milo stirred. His voice cracked like dry timber. "Thought if we didn't make it, someone else would. I wrote it all down before Creed caught on." Silas flipped another page. The writing changed tone. More notes, more urgency. Mentions of missing workers, of false shipments, and one phrase circled in pen. "No one gets out clean." Back at Cactus Hollow, Silas's sister, Nora Grady, was already throwing together a trauma bag. The two of them were as different as daylight and dust. Silas kept to the quiet. Nora burned hot like mesquite on the grill. A trauma nurse by trade, she could set a bone with one hand and swat a man's ego with the other. When her old radio squawked to life with Silas's voice, low and grave, she didn't even hesitate. "I need you out by Buffalo Wash. Bring everything." She didn't ask why, just said, 30 minutes, and floored it. The old pickup rattled down the dirt road with a toolbox clanging in the bed, and the smell of disinfectant riding shotgun. Nora arrived as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and smoky orange. She barely threw it in park before jumping out, hair in a loose braid, scrubs dusted from an earlier shift. One look at the two men on the ground and she was in full motion. IV bags, saline, antibiotics, gauze. No wasted questions. "Heat stroke, dehydration, 3rd-degree sunburns," she muttered while cleaning Boone's wrists. "These boys are tougher than the damn boots they're wearing." Bruno lay nearby, watching her with cautious eyes. Nora didn't flinch. "You the famous Bruno?" she said, dabbing antiseptic. "You've got the whole county whispering." Bruno licked her forearm once, then lay his head down. "Fair enough," Nora whispered, or by the time the stars blinked to life above the desert, Milo was sleeping steady. Boone was half awake, sipping weakly from a thermos Nora had warmed with broth. Silas crouched by the fire, slowly flipping through the field notebook again, his jaw tightening with each line. "You recognize any of these?" Nora asked quietly, settling beside him. "Yeah," he said. "Too many." They reached a page scrawled with marginalia and strange symbols. Nora's eyes landed on a name. Her face went white. "Karen Dupree." Silas looked up. "You know her?" "She was my roommate in nursing school. Took a job on a ranch out near Creed's property. Quit after 2 months. Told me something wasn't right with how the workers were treated. Then she vanished. No calls, no trace." Milo stirred from where he lay. "I saw her. At least, I think I did. Back of a truck. Scared. Then gone." Nora stared down at the name like it had teeth. "You can't take this to the sheriff," Boone rasped from behind them. His voice was dry but solid. "Creed owns half that office." "Then what do we do?" Nora said. "We wait," Boone said. "We gather. We plan." Bruno rose from his spot and padded over, gently nudging Silas's hand, as if to say, "Let's get to work." The next night, Silas opened the old mission chapel. Cracked adobe walls, slanted cross on the roof. A building long abandoned, like so many hopes in that part of Arizona. But tonight, lanterns lit the pews, not for prayer, for truth. Laborers came in 2s and 3s. Ranch hands, families, retired mechanics. Farm wives with lined faces and hard eyes. They came because someone whispered, "There's proof." Boone sat near the pulpit, Milo beside him, still bandaged but upright. Nora stood at the back, cross-armed and watchful. And Bruno? He waited by the door, not barking, not pacing, just present. The field notebook lay on a table. Anyone could read it. And they did. Whispers turned to questions, questions to rage. "That's my cousin's name. He vanished in June. Creed said he moved to Texas." Then came the girl, Lucia, 7 years old, boots too big, dress faded pink. She walked straight up to Bruno and knelt beside him. "He doesn't talk," she whispered, stroking his scarred ear, "but I think his heart's real big." Her father, Luis Navarro, stepped forward, laying a calloused hand on Bruno's head. "We thought no one cared, that no one would believe us." Remy, who had sat silent all night, finally spoke. "They didn't believe us either. That's why we have to believe each other now." Silas stood slowly. His voice was low but firm. "This town's lived under Creed's shadow too long. We're not asking you to fight. We're asking you to stand. If we speak," one rancher muttered. "Who listens?" Nora raised a hand. "I've got contacts. EMTs, nurses, medics, people who've seen what Creed buries. I take this quiet. They'll listen." An old man with a limp and cloudy eyes shuffled forward. Bonito Reyes. Used to work on Creed's estate. Fired for asking about a missing girl. "I still have keys to the south lot," he said. "And I remember where they kept the records." A silence settled. Then Milo whispered, "You feel that?" Boone nodded slowly. "The desert, it's listening." The desert wind had shifted. It wasn't much, just a change in the way it brushed the porch rails at Cactus Hollow or stirred the brittle grass near the corral. But to Silas Grady, it felt like the land itself was holding its breath. He stood near the fence, fingers wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, his sharp eyes scanning the road for something he couldn't name. Behind him, the house hummed with quiet life. Milo sat on the steps, scribbling into a new notebook, not one of blackmail and corruption, but a record of names they'd found, people they'd helped, and those still unaccounted for. Nora unpacked a crate of medical supplies with Remy's help, and Bruno lay beneath the porch in the shade, ears twitching at every gust of wind, eyes never still. The old dog hadn't left Boone's side for a full day. Now, with Boone resting inside, Bruno stayed on alert. No leash, no command, just the bone-deep loyalty of a creature who didn't forget. The sound came low at first. Engines. Then dust, rising behind 2 black trucks barreling up the dirt road like hounds after blood. Bruno was the first to react. He rose without a sound and growled, the sound low and steady in his throat. Not panic, not fear, warning. Silas set his mug down slowly on the fence post. Didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Inside the house, Boone heard it too and pushed off the cot, teeth clenched as his healing ribs protested. He reached for the revolver Silas had left nearby, old, worn, reliable, and stepped outside just as the trucks skidded to a stop in a storm of dust and heat. From the lead vehicle stepped a man who looked like trouble sharpened into a blade. Cal Reuter, mid-40s, shoulders like a barn door, shaved head glinting with sweat, and hands tattooed with half a dozen stories that didn't end well. A shotgun hung from his back like a warning label. 3 other men followed, young, edgy, pretending to look casual but not fooling anybody. Dark clothes, combat boots. The kind of guys who called themselves security but worked for cash and silence. Cal's voice cut through the air. "We're here for the traitors." Boone stepped forward, posture steady. "We're not property," he said, "and Creed's gonna need a lawyer more than muscle by the end of today." Cal laughed once, short and sharp. "Ain't no lawyer coming out here to save you. You think a dog and a nurse scare us?" That's when Nora walked out from behind the truck. Cal's smirk froze. She held up her phone with one hand. The red light on the camera app glowed like a warning flare. "You're already live," she said coolly, "streaming to a private channel with full location data. And, oh yeah, a U.S. Marshal is about a mile out watching this in real time." Behind her, a tall man in a tan jacket stepped into view. Marshal Renner, broad shoulders, stone face, no nonsense. He walked calmly, his badge flashing in the sun, followed by 2 federal agents in tactical gear. "That's long enough," Rainier said. "Drop your weapons. You're under federal custody for threatening a protected witness and obstruction of justice." One by one, the guns dropped. Cuffs snapped shut like punctuation marks. Boone let out a breath. Didn't smile. Just nodded. "Didn't think it'd be that easy," he muttered to Silas. "You're lucky Nora called a contact in Phoenix," the marshal replied. "Federal jurisdiction beats local muscle." Within the hour, the trucks were gone, carrying Creed's men toward the nearest federal facility. But it didn't stop there. Another caravan, this time federal agents and a SWAT team, moved in on Juan Creed's ranch. They found everything: a storage barn filled with chemical drums, ledgers, and blackmail material. Photo caches, names, faces. And behind one locked door, Karen Dupree's old ID badge, tucked inside a satchel beside a camera she'd last used 3 years ago. Creed was arrested in his office, still smoking a cigar, still confident. "You boys made a mistake," he hissed at Boone as they cuffed him. Boone didn't even look at him. "So did you," he said, then turned away. Back at Cactus Hollow, the shift in the air was immediate. You couldn't see it. You couldn't measure it. But you could feel it. The tension had cracked. Not shattered, but cracked just enough for air and light to get in. Inside the barn, Bruno chased a jackrabbit halfway across the yard, tail wagging, before returning to Boone's side, tongue lolling, body relaxed for the first time in days. Nora knelt beside him with a red bandana she'd pulled from her back pocket. "Hold still," she said, tying it loosely around his neck. "There. Now you're official." Bruno tilted his head, then leaned into her hand. "You're staying," Boone told him. "You know this place could use a good dog." Silas, leaning against the barn wall, tipped his hat. "We'll build him a proper shelter. Shade in summer, warmth in winter." Milo and Remy stood by the fence, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Remy stretched, groaning as his back cracked. "Feels weird," he said. "What does?" Milo asked. "This is being safe, having people who care." Milo nodded. "Takes getting used to." Boone looked at both men, then toward the porch where Nora stood with Bruno curled at her feet. "No one gets left behind," he said quietly. "Not this time. Not even a dog." That night, the stars came out like fireflies caught in a sheet of black velvet. Sable Rock's skies had always been clear, clearer than most cities would ever know, but tonight they looked different, brighter, closer, like they'd been waiting for this story to be told. Inside the old chapel, now cleared of dust and broken benches, families gathered again, this time not for fear or secrets, but for planning. They took the next steps quietly. Nora met with medical contacts, nurses who had worked under Creed's network and left, afraid, but now ready to talk. Silas arranged communication with out-of-state officials to ensure protection for whistleblowers. Remy started compiling a full archive of testimonies. And Bruno kept watch. At night, he curled under the porch. By day, he followed Boone around the property, tail high, scanning the horizon like he knew this wasn't over. Some wounds leave scars, some stay raw, but others begin to heal when the right heart shows up. And sometimes that heart has 4 legs, a dusty coat, and a memory stronger than most people ever dream of. The dust hadn't even settled over Creed's ranch when whispers started rolling through the county like tumbleweeds in a summer storm. People were talking. At diners, gas stations, feed stores, places where news traveled faster than cell signal. When Creed's fall had shaken something loose, not just in the legal system, in people. Folks who had been too afraid to speak were suddenly curious, hopeful, maybe even bold. At Cactus Hollow, the quiet wasn't silence anymore. It was waiting. But it was different now, like holding your breath not out of fear, but because something big was about to break open. Silas Grady stood at the edge of the corral, watching the gelding Murphy nibble at a stubborn patch of grass. He didn't say much these days, but his eyes were always moving, measuring the wind, the dust, the weight of the past. Inside the house, Boone was finally up and walking, albeit stiffly, his ribs taped and bruised, but mending. Milo was on the porch swing, legs crossed, notebook in his lap, chewing on a pencil eraser. Remy, still limping from dehydration and sunburn, was in the barn helping Nora clean up the makeshift infirmary. And Bruno? Bruno was parked near the back fence, facing the southern ridge like a statue. Still, focused. The only time he moved was when a familiar truck rolled up the dirt road. The engine sputtered to a stop. A man climbed out slow, every motion deliberate, like someone used to measuring each step. Benito Reyes, late 60s, boots worn down to the leather, denim jacket faded like desert sky. His left arm was still stiff from an old injury, and one eye carried the fog of partial blindness. He held up a ring of keys, didn't smile, just said, "I'm ready." They met later that night in the chapel again. Low lanterns, quiet voices, eyes sharp with memory, and something more dangerous. Purpose. Benito laid the keys on the table. South lots where they kept the ledgers, backup servers, employee files, contracts Creed didn't want folks seeing. I was maintenance. I had access to most of it, not all. But enough. Boone nodded. We go in quiet. No guns, no hero plays. Remy frowned. You sure? We got the feds now. We have their attention, Nora clarified. But attention's not the same as trust. We bring them something they can't ignore. Milo tapped the notebook. They buried a lot, but not deep enough. Bruno let out a soft chuff, circling the pew once before settling under the table. We take only what proves the people hurt most, Boone added. The rest, we let the agents handle. They set out before dawn. Nora stayed behind with Remy, still not fully recovered, and a secure radio. Silas, Boone, Milo, and Benito rode out in a dusty blue pickup, older than half the buildings in town. Bruno rode in the bed, ears perked, body low, eyes sharp. The sun was just starting to stretch across the hills when they reached the south access gate of Creed's estate. No guards, no motion sensors. Nothing had been touched since the raid. Creed got cocky, Silas muttered. Never figured he'd fall. Benito guided them through the outer fencing, his hands steady on the keys. He hesitated only once, in front of an old metal door with a rusted bolt. They moved things around after that girl disappeared, he said. Karen. But some stuff they couldn't just toss. Government records, payroll, time cards. The door creaked open. Inside, rows of filing cabinets, some still locked. A workbench. Half a dozen dusty hard drives stacked under a desk. And in the corner, a locked safe. Boone and Milo went to the files. Silas photographed every sheet worth keeping. Benito found the backup power switch and brought up flickering lights. Bruno sniffed around the perimeter, every muscle tight, tail low. It was Milo who found the photo binder, thick, unlabeled. He flipped it open and froze. Boone, he said softly, you need to see this. Inside were dozens of photos, workers, most unaware they were being watched. Some looked scared, some beaten. A few just gone from one page to the next. Then came a photo of Karen Dupree, grainy, flash-lit, but unmistakable, standing behind a chain-link fence, holding a clipboard. Then a second photo, blurry, of her being led into the back of a truck. Boone clenched his jaw. That's enough. We've got what we came for. But the moment they stepped back outside, Bruno growled. Low, fierce, pointed east. A dust cloud. Boone cursed under his breath. Company. Silas grabbed the radio. Nora, do we have movement? Her voice crackled back. Just a second truck on the ranch scanner. No tags. You need to move. They scrambled back to the truck, threw the files into the cab. Bruno leapt in last, barking once as tires screamed into motion behind them. They didn't look back. Didn't need to. The engine behind them told the whole story. They made it back to the edge of the county line before the second truck gave up the chase. Bruno didn't sit again until they pulled into the barn. He stood, guard-like, scanning the trees, the hills, the road behind. That night, in the house, they spread the files across the kitchen table. Milo handed Nora the photo of Karen. She stared at it for a long time, tears rising and falling before she spoke. "She knew something," Nora said, "and she died for it." "Not anymore," Boone said. "We bring this forward." They called in Marshal Renner the next morning. The evidence, physical, digital, visual, was now too dense to bury. Names, locations, wages unpaid, missing persons linked to Creed's logistics operations, and the photo of Karen. Renner took it all without a word, but before he left, he knelt in front of Bruno and held out his hand. "Don't suppose you'll work for the government again," he said. "But for what it's worth, you did more than half my team ever could." Bruno licked his fingers once, then turned away. Still no leash, still no command, just mission complete. That afternoon, news trucks showed up from Phoenix, then Flagstaff. By nightfall, half the state had heard. And the photo of Karen Dupree? It made the 6 o'clock news. Her parents called Nora. They hadn't known what happened, only that she never came home. Now they knew. Now everyone did. As the sky turned soft and bruised again, Boone sat on the porch, fingers lightly scratching behind Bruno's ears. "You didn't quit on me," he said, "even when I quit on myself." Bruno tilted his head, then leaned closer. Milo joined him, flipping through the last few pages of his journal. "What are you writing now?" Boone asked. "Names we saved," Milo said, "and those we still have to." Remy walked up behind them, a water jug in one hand. "You think it's over?" Boone shook his head. "Not even close, but it started." And in the cooling light of that evening, Bruno, scarred, tired, and still, lay at the edge of the porch, one eye watching the dark, as if ready for whatever came next. He had no rank, no collar, no command, just the memory of a man who once believed in him, and the choice to believe back. The sun rose like a slow confession over the hills of Sable Rock. It didn't crash through the sky. It whispered, stretched long arms of light over barn roofs, barbed wire, and adobe walls, as if it knew what had happened and what hadn't yet. At Cactus Hollow, everything was still. But it wasn't the kind of still that meant peace. It was the kind that came after a storm, right before another. Silas Grady stood beside the water pump, cranking slow, letting the rust-clear water spill into a battered tin bowl. Bruno stood beside him, calm but alert. His head didn't move, but his eyes did, always watching. He didn't bark, didn't whine. But even Silas could tell something was off. "You smellin' something I don't?" Silas muttered. Bruno blinked once, then looked toward the hills. Inside the house, Boone sat at the kitchen table with Nora, flipping through the final pages of Milo's ledger. They had printed out additional records pulled from Creed's old hard drives, contracts, bank accounts, coded messages between ranch sites. One folder held a scanned map, coordinates circled in red, locations that didn't appear on any town or county registry. "This one here," Boone said, pointing to a spot southwest of Buffalo Wash, "was updated 3 weeks ago. Milo said it was a drop barn. No cameras, just a ledger swap, maybe a storage point." Nora squinted. "Then why is it still active if Creed's in custody?" Boone leaned back. "Because we only cut off the head. The body's still moving." By mid-morning, the plan was made. Silas, Boone, and Remy would ride out. Milo would stay behind with Nora, still on the radio. Bruno would go, because Bruno always went. They packed light. Silas carried a sidearm and a field knife. Boone loaded extra canteens, a first aid pouch, and a printed copy of the map. Remy strapped his old binoculars and a folding shovel onto his saddle. By the time they rode out, the heat was already rising off the sand like smoke. The drop barn didn't look like much. Just 4 walls, a rusted roof, and a sliding door wide enough to drive a flatbed through. No signage, no tracks, no cattle nearby. But as they approached, Bruno froze. His hackles lifted. A low rumble stirred in his chest. Not loud, but enough. Boone pulled up beside him and whispered, "Easy." Bruno didn't move forward. He looked up at the barn and backed up. Silas dismounted. He circled wide toward a side window, crouching low. He peeked in. A moment later, he dropped. Not out of panic, but instinct. A figure moved inside. 2, maybe 3. "Armed," Silas said under his breath. "One's got a rifle slung low. Not ranchers. Looks like hired help." Remy frowned. "They watching for someone?" "No," Boone said. "They're cleaning."
Cleaning what?
Boone pulled a bandana over his mouth. "Loose ends." They waited until the sun dipped enough to cast long shadows from the rock bluff. They moved low and fast. Inside the barn, Silas slipped behind a hay rack, Boone flanked the north wall, and Remy circled back to cover the rear. Bruno stayed with Boone, silent, steady, like the past had trained him for this moment. From his angle, Boone could see pallets of boxed files, burn barrels, smoke curling from behind the barn like someone had just started a fire pit. Then a voice. "Once this stuff's gone, the rest don't matter. They won't trace it." Another replied, "Boss said leave no trace. That includes dogs. You hear about the mutt that led the feds?" Boone's fists clenched. Bruno didn't move, but his ears flattened. They made their move on Boone's signal. It wasn't loud, just a single click of the tongue. Bruno bolted first. Silent, fast, teeth bared. He took down the first man before he could even unsling his rifle. Silas rushed the second, knocking his shoulder into a support beam. The man hit the floor hard, winded. Remy burst in through the rear and tackled the third. Boone stepped in last, revolver aimed steady. "Drop it." The fourth man, older, shaking, didn't argue. They zip-tied the men to a center beam and started searching the space. Bruno circled the perimeter, nose to the ground. Under a tarp behind the tractor, Remy found plastic totes full of burned photo fragments, disassembled phones, and blank envelopes stuffed with cash. "Payment stash," Boone muttered, "or blackmail fund." Silas found IDs, 10 of them, different names, all missing from nearby towns in the last 3 years. Nora's voice crackled through the radio on Boone's belt. "Are you clear?" "Clear," he answered, "but you'll want to see what we found." They brought it all back. By nightfall, Nora had spread the contents across the chapel's altar like sacred offerings. Locals filtered in quietly, some with their hats in their hands, others with tears in their eyes. Javier Rojo recognized his niece's ID. Gone 2 years. No leads, no answers. An older woman whispered, "That's my grandson's work card. He took a job near Sable Rock, never came back." Milo stood in the back, notebook against his chest, eyes tight. "It's bigger than we thought," Nora whispered. Boone nodded. "But now it's visible, and that changes everything." A week later, federal authorities returned. Not for show, but to build cases. Forensics teams combed the barn, recovered drives, decoded files, and one by one, they found them. The rest of the network. Creed wasn't the only one, just the loudest. Back at the ranch, Cactus Hollow began to feel like more than a home base. It was a safe haven now. Nora organized a mobile medical unit for survivors. Milo compiled an open-source database with permission from victims' families. Silas started training locals in basic security and land rights.
And Bruno?
Bruno stayed by the gate each morning, watching the road. Sometimes wagging when a familiar truck appeared. Sometimes pacing when it didn't. He didn't ask for attention, but he always seemed to know who needed him. One afternoon, Lucia, the little girl from the chapel, came back with her father, Luis. She knelt beside Bruno, this time with a bandana of her own. "I made him one," she said proudly, "to match." Boone knelt down beside her. "You think he likes it?" Lucia smiled. He already does. He's smiling on the inside. That night, as the fire cracked in the old chimney and the others drifted off to bed, Boone sat on the porch steps with Bruno curled beside him. He looked up at the stars, sharp and endless. You did it, boy. You saw what no one else did. And you didn't give up. Bruno leaned his weight into Boone's side, breathing steady. Sometimes God doesn't send thunder. Sometimes he sends teeth and memory and a dog who refuses to walk away. Some endings don't come with trumpets. They come with quiet mornings, worn boots by the door, and a dog sleeping under the porch like nothing ever happened. It had been 3 weeks since the truth about Juan Creed's empire spilled into the Arizona sun, since the barn raid, since Bruno dragged the ghosts of war and loyalty into the light. Now Cactus Hollow buzzed not with fear, but with life. The federal task force had returned with reinforcements, cameras, and court orders. They'd cleared barns, bunkers, and tunnels Creed's men had built into the bedrock outside Sable Rock. The property was sealed off with yellow tape and metal signs warning against trespassing. Dozens of missing persons were identified. Families finally got phone calls they never thought would come. And in the back of one locked shed, they found Karen Dupree's medical badge hung on a nail, almost like she left it there on purpose, waiting to be found. Back at the ranch, Nora ran a rotating team of mobile medics out of the barn. 2 nurses from Tucson came on weekends. A field surgeon from Flagstaff offered free evaluations twice a week. Victims, once too scared to speak, now came for bandages and stayed to tell their stories. Milo turned a corner. His new notebook wasn't just for names and notes. It became a journal, a kind of prayer on paper. Each page written in blocky letters, steady and true. And for the first time in a long time, he slept through the night. Remy was different too. He started building things, not for himself, but for the ranch. A new water line to the east pasture. A shelter for traveling EMTs. A fence that actually held the paint-gelding Murphy, who seemed finally to trust again. One afternoon, Boone found Remy sanding down a wooden bench with a soldier's focus. "What's that for?" Boone asked. Remy grinned. "For her." He nodded toward Lucia, the little girl who'd given Bruno a matching bandana. She was sitting near the old swing under the mesquite tree, telling the dog stories as he blinked patiently. "She says he listens better than most grown-ups," Remy added. Boone smears Turtsim he's. She's not wrong. Bruno was the same, steady, present, silent. Every morning he walked the full length of the fence line, nose low, ears alert. He stopped at the road. He watched the sky. He waited. Then he'd trot back to the porch, flop down with a groan, and let the sun hit his scarred side like it was a warm hand telling him he was home. The chapel meetings kept happening, sometimes planned, sometimes spontaneous. One Sunday, Marshal Renner returned with a clipboard, a coffee, and a federal investigator from Washington. They sat in the back and listened as locals stood up to tell their truths. Old men with calloused hands, widows who had lost grandsons, mothers with missing sons, all saying, "We were scared, but not anymore." At the end of the night, Rayner approached Silas with a firm handshake and a question. "Is the dog for hire?" Silas chuckled. "Not a chance." "Didn't think so." One morning, before the sun fully broke the horizon, Boone found Bruno sitting by the back gate. The dog didn't move, just stared. "Something out there?" Boone asked. Bruno didn't bark. Instead, he stood up, turned toward the barn, and padded slow into the field. Boone followed. There, just past the rock wall where the wash cut through the land, was a truck. A woman stepped out. Tall, dust-covered, hair pulled back in a messy braid, a bandage on her arm, and a file folder clutched to her chest. Boone squinted. "Karen?" She nodded. "Holy hell," he muttered. She spoke carefully. "I saw the photo, on the news. I knew you'd found the barn." Bruno walked to her slowly, sniffed her boots, then leaned against her leg. Her eyes welled up. I thought I was the only one left. They brought her inside. She drank water, ate quietly, told them how she escaped before Creed's men locked the rest in, how she'd been hiding near the Colorado line, watching, waiting, hoping someone would pick up the trail. "You did," she said to Boone. "No," Boone replied. He looked at Bruno. "He did." The next few days blurred with interviews, paperwork, reporters. Karen's story broke the case wide open, internally and nationally. Congressional committees launched inquiries. Victim reparation funds were established. Whistleblower protections expanded. And in every single headline, there was a picture of Bruno, bandana tied around his neck, ears up, eyes forward. The caption read, "The dog who didn't forget." Months passed. The heat gave way to fall. Leaves that barely existed in the high desert turned dusty gold. Cactus Hollow stayed standing. Some nights were quiet. Some weren't, but nobody slept with one eye open anymore. People showed up to volunteer, to help rebuild, to stay. Because the story didn't just go viral, it went deep. Not because of the documents, not because of the court, because of the dog, because of the idea that sometimes what saves us isn't loud or armed. Sometimes it just stays beside us when no one else will. That winter, they held a ceremony at the edge of the field. No podium, no politics, just people. Karen spoke first, so did Nora and Renner. Even Lucia stepped up and said, "He listens better than anyone." Then Boone stepped forward, Bruno by his side. He looked out over the crowd and said, "I've worn uniforms most of my life, taken orders, broken a few, seen the best and worst in men, but I never saw more courage than I did in this dog, who didn't wait for permission, didn't follow a command. He just knew someone needed help, and he went." Silas raised a wooden plaque, a tribute, carved with a paw print, and the words, "No leash. Orders, just loyalty." That night, around the fire, Boone sat beside Bruno on the porch. "You changed everything, you know," he said quietly. "Brought me back. Brought them back. Hell, you brought yourself back." Bruno blinked slow, settled his head on Boone's boot. "I don't know what comes next," Boone added, "but I know you'll be there." Behind him, the stars blinked awake. The desert, finally, was still for the right reasons. And that's where we'll leave this story. Not with a chase, not with a verdict, but with a scarred dog and a man leaning into tomorrow, together. Because sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear medals. They just stay. Thank you for walking through this journey with us. If Bruno's story moved you, inspired you, or made you think about loyalty and second chances in a new way, please let us know in the comments. Have you ever met an animal who changed your life? Or seen loyalty where you least expected it? We'd love to hear your story. Drop it below. And if you believe in stories like this, of courage, healing, and the bond between human and animal, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals. We've got more stories that need to be told. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never underestimate a dog with a memory.